Nintendo consoles and their gimmicks. With each new hardware release, Nintendo loves to cram in some sort of hardware oddity to help them stand out from the competitors or play into their latest initiative. And the Switch 2 is no exception. Aside from the considerable performance boost, the Switch 2's hardware is host to a selection of interesting and/or questionable hardware decisions. Some brought over from the original Switch and some brand new. From the motion controls that have been around since the Wii, to the detachable Joy-Cons, a hardware staple for the Switch's identity, to the new optical sensor in the Joy-Con 2s that allow for mouse-style gameplay. The Switch 2 has its fair share of hardware features that are quintessentially Nintendo. So let's take a look back at Nintendo's history of hardware, at each console's identifying gimmick, and see if we can follow Nintendo's philosophies in its development journey. Hal from GamesRadar here, and welcome to Switch On, where we talk all things Nintendo Switch 2. Let's start off where it all began. Sort of. While Nintendo did develop hardware prior, the Nintendo Entertainment System is where the Nintendo we know today really first started to take form. Released in 1983 in Japan and 1985 elsewhere, the gimmick really was that this machine played games. Released in a landscape where gaming looked like this, and were exclusively on horrendously expensive supercomputers, the NES was, for the time, the first affordable, family-friendly games console. From the impetus of home consoles to the impetus of Nintendo's handheld legacy, it may not look like it, but the Game Boy really was a technological marvel when it first released. It may look like a total cinder block, but considering the only competitors were the Atari Lynx, and then a year later the Sega Game Gear, it really was the pinnacle of portable gaming at the time. While the Game Gear was vastly more powerful and had a full-color backlit screen, it being the size of a small aircraft carrier, and at launch being nearly double the price in the US, it left the Game Boy surging ahead. Now, the SNES, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, wasn't actually that impressive for the time. The Sega Mega Drive, or Sega Genesis for my friends across the pond, had been out for a year when Nintendo caught up to the 16-bit era, and was still more powerful than Nintendo's Super installment. The SNES could handle effects and sound better than Sega's console, but the Mega Drive was quicker and had more raw power. Their price was pretty identical too, with the SNES only $10 more expensive than the Mega Drive at launch, at $199. So why did it pull ahead? Well, probably due to its game's brand appeal. Super Metroid, Super Mario World, Super Mario Kart, and of course, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, to name a few. While the NES was where we first saw Nintendo as the company we know today, the SNES was when we first saw Nintendo games first gain that Nintendo shine. Well, from a success to a flop, the Virtual Boy was quite possibly Nintendo's biggest blunder. Its biggest gimmick was its downfall, the rudimentary VR, that used parallax effects to simulate depth in its red monochrome display. Ugly, uncomfortable, and downright unpleasant to play, it's no wonder the Virtual Boy just didn't take off. Okay, here we go. The Nintendo 64 was an icon. Named for its 64-bit processor, allowing a new venture of video game imagery for Nintendo: 3 dimensions. Now, it's worth bearing in mind the N64 followed its new competitor, the Sony PlayStation, by 2 years, the PlayStation being Sony's hold my beer moment after their failed joint venture with Nintendo. And when Nintendo decided to take the plunge into the 3rd dimension, you can tell it was uncharted territory. Just look at that controller. Why? There was method to this madness. Allegedly, you're supposed to hold these 2 prongs for 3D games, while grabbing these 2 for 2D games. Why they felt the need to separate it like this, Nintendo only knows. Gaming on the go, but in color. I refer you to my previous statement about a small aircraft carrier. The Game Boy Color wasn't particularly remarkable in terms of power, hosting very similar graphic fidelity to its elder brother, but simply with added color palettes. The Game Boy Color's main selling appeal was its price and its sheer catalog of games, including the original's game library too, with backwards compatibility. Now, sticking with Game Boy, the Game Boy Advance was one of the biggest steps forwards in handheld gaming history. A similar form factor to its predecessor, but with 32-bit processing. I mean, all you really need to do is compare Pokemon Gold to Pokemon Ruby and you get the idea. Plus, the SP revision added a rechargeable battery and, good lord, a backlit screen. finally, well, a frontlit screen first, but then a backlit screen. Oh, and the Game Boy Micro was a thing. You remember that? Yeah, me neither. And I own one. The GameCube saw the continuation of Nintendo naming its consoles far too literally. It's a cube that plays games. What more do you want? But here's the thing. The GameCube was arguably Nintendo's last console to seriously and directly contend with its peers. The GameCube is technically beefier than the PS2, its main rival, and this showed. In third-party games with both a PS2 and a GameCube port, the GameCube almost always outperformed its Sony equivalent. And as for first-party, we all know Nintendo has a knack for making its hardware sing, and the GameCube was possibly the first major example of this. Nintendo aimed for the GameCube to be the more powerful alternative to the ubiquitous PS2. But almost immediately after it was released, the absolute beast that was the original Xbox launched, better filling that niche. So Nintendo changed tactics. More literal naming nonsense here. DS, dual screen, is right there in the name. The DS wore its gimmick on its sleeve, with its games utilizing the lower touchscreen for everything from an interactive map to menu navigation to any game mechanic that would even remotely make sense. But it didn't stop there. The DS was crammed full of features. It had a built-in microphone, GBA backwards compatibility, and Wi-Fi connectivity with online multiplayer on a lot of its major titles. Actually kind of wild when you think about it. Compared to its contemporary, the Sony PSP, the DS was massively underpowered. So the DS could be the first instance of Nintendo prioritizing creativity with its hardware over raw processing power. And speaking of this approach, the Wii was the poster child for this new mentality Nintendo had seemingly adopted. Hardware-wise, it wasn't much more than a slightly beefed up GameCube. But the gimmicks, oh, the gimmicks. The Wii marked the beginning of Nintendo's love affair with motion controls. Combining infrared and an accelerometer, the Wiimotes, the Wii's television remote-looking controller, captured pretty accurate motion right out of the gate. And nothing displayed this better than Wii Sports, possibly the best pack-in title that's ever existed. The slew of accessories for the controller just expanded this functionality too. The Wii Motion Plus added gyroscopes to unlock even more precise motion tracking capability. The classic controller added a more traditional gaming experience with the nunchuck bridging the gap. You could even turn the Wiimote into a light gun with the Wii Zapper. While the DS may have been a turning point for Nintendo's identity in the gaming landscape, the Wii solidified it. 3-dimension screens? 3 dual screens? Which one is it, Nintendo? You can't have both. Okay, this one's easy. 3D without glasses. What sorcery is this? Well, if you've ever wondered how the 3DS's 3D works, it's actually pretty simple. The top screen utilizes a parallax barrier, an opaque filter with precise slits that allows each of your eyes to see something different. With a slight variation of perspective between the two images, this emulates a sense of depth. This does mean the game image has to essentially be rendered twice though, so it really puts a toll on the system's hardware, and some games just simply disable the function to save on resources. Nintendo did eventually release a version without this functionality, the 2DS, which was considerably cheaper to produce and therefore to buy. The 3DS also hosted a lot more social features too, Spot Pass and Street Pass being the best examples, allowing proximity to other players' 3DS units and beacons at certain real-world locations to unlock content on your system. It also had cameras. 3 of them, 1 inward-facing and 2 outward-facing, so you could take 3D photos and view them with the 3D effect. The Wii with a tablet. That's pretty much it. The Wii U baffled consumers because of its gimmick. The gamepad was pretty innovative. When used effectively, the prospect of having a second touchscreen built into your controller is a bonkers but actually pretty fun idea. Essentially a home console DS that you could also play exclusively handheld. Sort of. The Wii U had promise, but the fact that even I initially thought it was just a hyped up, luxurious peripheral for the original Wii, and didn't realize it was a whole new console, couldn't have helped its sales. It is worth noting the Wii U saw the introduction of Amiibo, Nintendo's venture into the toys-to-life market, with its first compatible games being those on the Wii U. And while the Amiibo spread across to the new 3DS and carried on into the future, not a lot else did. Some really important lessons were learnt with the Wii U, That gamepad is ridiculous, but it did pave the way for things to come. And finally, we have the Switch, the start of the Nintendo Renaissance. While the 3DS sold okay during its relatively long lifespan, the Wii U was a disappointment for Nintendo, so they really needed to switch things up. I am so sorry. So we have the Switch, a hybrid home and handheld console. It's been imitated since, but the Switch really was mind-boggling when it was announced. And even past its ability to switch form, its hardware is packed to the absolute gills with gimmicks. HD rumble, accelerometer for motion controls, an IR sensor, NFC for amiibo, a touchscreen that is never used, the list goes on and on. The Switch really marked a new era for Nintendo, continuing to do their own thing, separate from what the rest of the gaming market was up to, but a more measured and rational approach to their design philosophies, and not just throwing things at a wall and seeing what sticks. So, there we have it, every Nintendo console and their gimmicks. Looking back, you can really see the journey Nintendo went on with its approach to its hardware. From establishing itself as a contender, to trying to keep up with its competitors, to deciding to just do its own thing, maybe going too far, and then finding a balance with the Nintendo Switch. Nintendo's learned a lot of lessons in its long history, and it really looks like it's utilizing everything it's learned with the Switch too. But what about you? What was your favorite Nintendo console? Which console gimmick did you love? And which, if any, did you not love so much? Let us know in the comments, and we'll see you next time for Switch On.